We didn't have a lot of choices about this last new normal, as everyone kept referring to it, but there's a next normal coming. And I think it needs some conscious decisions about how we design it and how we negotiate it and how we navigate it with other people.
Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories.
So here's my story. And I will preface it by saying I have admittedly been feeling extremely nostalgic and like sentimental of late. And in no small part because my son is choosing his college, and I'm just aware of that like ticking clock of these next couple months before he's gone. But
and nobody reading your social media would ever have picked up on that, by the way. Just throw that out there.
Yeah. So it's true. I'm a little transparent on the feelings on that side of things. But anyway, I saw a funny post about this thing that I want to bring up that really spoke to some of this like conflicted feelings, because this also ties over into the pandemic sort of unfolding situation. And it was a tweet someone posted that said, half the people I know are planning to be feral this summer, and the other half plan to continue being agoraphobic, or something about being agoraphobic. And then it said, I plan to do both. And it just captured this real tug and pull tension that I have seen come up in a bunch of conversations lately. And I've certainly been feeling it, but I was mostly associating it with that nostalgia kind of tug and pulling with my son going away and whatnot, and just other kind of emotional things. But I realized that there is a fair amount of it that is actually a more universal tension. And so I started asking people about it. In my last Insight meeting last month, I said, I have this hunch that I think we're all so aware that this past year thrust upon us lots of things we didn't get to decide about. We didn't get to decide. I didn't get to decide that all my gigs for my band got canceled, or that conferences we were going to go to got canceled, or like all these things got yanked away from us. And we didn't get to decide that. And that stunk. And so I think we all are very clear that for a year, we've been excited to have those things back, or at least some of them. And that's kind of my point. I think along the way, lots of us discovered there were things that we didn't mind so much about the pandemic setting, whether it's a lack of a commute, whereas other people might be like, I kind of miss my commute. But for some people, not having a commute has been a positive thing. I did a little poll on social media and someone said curbside pickup, like I love curbside pickup and I will do it everywhere I possibly can. And what's interesting to me, so it started as this conversation in my own head of what do I want to hold on to? Like, what do I want to make sure from this time that I now know I enjoy and is important to me that I want to keep doing, or things that I don't want to do as much of if like space in my calendar is one of those things. And here's the tricky part. I think we're going to find ourselves just like soaking in cognitive dissonance as things we are legitimately excited about having opportunities for again, suddenly turn into a gigantically packed week. And I did it this week. I will say right now, like having space in my calendar is something I've really enjoyed. I don't know exactly how I did it, but this week, almost every single day is back-to-back appointments where I have to excuse myself to run and get a glass of water or something. I literally don't even have a minute between calls. I don't want that. And yet I literally just allowed that to happen accidentally. So I wanted to bring up this conversation. It's going to need like a conscious effort to say, nope, I want this, or I don't want that. And as we create, that's my point. We didn't have a lot of choices about this last new normal, as everyone kept referring to it, but there's a next normal coming. And I think it needs some conscious decisions about how we design it and how we negotiate it and how we navigate it with other people.
Yeah, I mean, I do like the way you positioned this as the freedom to decide versus having decisions thrust upon us, because with COVID, we didn't have a freedom to decide. So, a very small example is pre-COVID, you and I would schedule podcasts by figuring out when you could come to the studio.
Yeah.
And now we just schedule them when we can hop on a Zoom call, which doesn't involve, your traveling or anything like that. Now, there are some advantages to coming into the studio and having an in-person conversation. And I know Tom,
I was just going to say, Tom is like, please go back to the studio.
Please, for the love of God, go back to the studio. But the fact of the matter is, we haven't had anybody reach out to us or say in the Facebook group, I really liked your podcast before COVID, but I can't even listen to it because now you're on Zoom. So we accomplished the same thing, and we have the freedom to decide how that goes. And I was having this conversation with my team because we are at a place now where everybody on my team has had at least one shot, and envisioning obviously their second, so being fully vaccinated. So really, when you're looking at middle of May, I would expect everyone on my team would be not only fully vaccinated, but have that 2-week or et cetera buffer, once having been fully vaccinated. So the question we've been discussing is, at first we positioned the conversation by saying, well, great, okay, by mid-May, then we'll be back in the office. And then as it came up, and we get along really well and we work together really well. But as it came up, some people were like, well, wait, let's not just blithely say that we're going to be back in the office as if that's another decision that the vaccination date has thrust upon us.
Yeah.
What is that?
Yes.
What does that mean? And Kim was saying, for example, when her son Nicholas, when he's in school, I actually get a lot more done here. And I like it here. And I think that you have a freedom to decide, so that makes it better. And so I started thinking, well, that's true. I do like getting together. There's a value to it, but maybe, but we haven't given much thought to something other than that's over. Let's go back to what it was before. And
that's the risk, I think. Like especially because, at least for a lot of people I'm talking to and myself, because there's this pent up everything. There's all this stuff that's been waiting to happen. So it's the things that, my calendar filled this week because things that have been waiting, this is actually just more like an energetic thing. I think people are feeling that, hopefully like, okay, well, now we can get back in the thing. Cause it's not even like all my things are in person because that's not even the case, but it's almost like spring is happening in more ways than just in the ground. People are like, okay, now like there's a horizon line. So let's start moving on this thing. And so all this opportunity is coming at people, and it's hard to say no to that, especially, it's exciting and it's fun. And for me, the business versions of this are far more complicated just because there's so many more variables to consider. And I can see the issue much more clearly and see the risk and the complications much more clearly if I think about especially one specific personal example. So with my band, I love singing in my band. It is nothing but joy to me. It does nothing but add goodness to my life to sing in my band. So there's no way and I've missed it desperately. I am excited for gigs to happen again. And I'm not sure I'm excited to play 3 gigs a weekend, 2 weekends a month, to be gone Friday and Saturday. And I've really enjoyed spending time with my kids. And oh my God, I'm going to start to cry. My son is leaving. I'm just so cognizant of this time. And, I've noticed, I think I've mentioned this before, like at 3, I've been trying not to schedule things between 3 and 4 o'clock because one or both of my teenagers finish their school and come up here. And even if on the days they do go, that's when they get home. And because I'm here instead of at my office, they come in and plop on the bed and want to tell me a story or show me something on their phone. And very early on, I'd feel bad because I'm like, oh, I'm going to miss this moment with them because I was on a call. And then I was like, oh, I'm just not going to have calls. But if I'm out and about at every, at clients, if I'm at your place recording from 2:30 to 3:30, I won't even be here for that moment. And so it feels like really important time to take stock and get super, super clear personally on your, like what your ideal is. Like, what are all my ideal things? I won't be able to work all these things in because somebody else is going to have theirs. And some places will just instantly go, let's go back to the way it always was. And making decisions about how much you say yes to, what you say no to, what you consciously make. I mean, the fact that I can walk outside and garden for 20 minutes between calls or something isn't just a fun thing. Like, I think I'm better at what I do when I have those kind of creative moments, or just go sit in the sun for a few minutes. I am better professionally when I'm not sitting plowing 8 hours in a row, staring at a screen, and or even just out and about running around. So I feel like this conversation, I have way more questions than I have answers, but I feel like if we don't ask these questions and really get clear, we're all going to accidentally just zoom, no pun intended, back to a reality that I'm not sure we actually totally wanted.
But the problem is that, at least from my perspective, it's hard to get crystal clear on that because, for example, I believe that there's a real value, not 24/7, not even 40 hours a week, but there is a real value for our team being in each other's presence, being able to collaborate personally, being able to have these off-the-cuff conversations as opposed to scheduled Zoom meetings with an agenda, and even the non-work related conversations. I think there's an importance to culture and to creating something that lasts, that has legs. However, if I say all that, and I firmly believe it in my heart, and somebody on the team were to say, yeah, you say that, but we can have those conversations by Zoom or on Teams, and I don't see why it doesn't. We've been doing fine. I don't see what we've lost by not being in person. It's hard for me to enunciate it. I can't look at the spreadsheet and say, oh, well, we had 12% more clients when we were in person and they could walk in, or we had this much more revenue, or we could. It's just a lot of figuring out the next normal, to me, is based more on feeling and gut reaction than it is persuasive and provable arguments.
Yeah. Well, and to everything you just said about the value that your team gets from being in person. In my peer group yesterday that I was facilitating, I asked this question, and one of the gentlemen said that he and his wife get along great. Like they have no issues with each other, but this last year they have been working. Neither one of them has to be on a lot of calls, so they're sitting sort of like on either side of the living room, both on their laptops, camped out, like with their stuff. And he said it's interesting because on the one hand, it's they will just randomly chatter to the other one to tell him something, tell him a story or mention a thing or whatever. And he's like, and I'll be honest, when I'm doing the chattering, I love it. Sometimes when she's doing the chattering, I'm like, don't interrupt me. He said, however, what they've noticed is in that same way that there's value at the office of those interstitial conversations, those water cooler moments kind of thing, their relationship has greatly benefited from these having more of those water cooler moments where they're just a little bit more in touch there. And it's wild because he said they didn't feel out of touch beforehand, but they feel a lot more in touch now. And I love that example because that doesn't necessarily have to mean that the two of them sit in their living room 40 hours a week. It means I've discovered something that has value to me, which is more time where my partner and I have interstitial water cooler conversations, or just that my partner and I feel the way we do. Is there a different way that happens? Do we need to have more? There might be a different way to get to that outcome. This is the archaeological dig that I find interesting about this conversation is we have discovered things that we value via doing things that we didn't necessarily ever have an opportunity to be doing or had opportunities to be doing other things. If that's a thing you value, it might not even be that that's the only way to get it. Maybe there are other ways you get that thing, but don't skip over that value and finding other ways to do that.
No, but what you said was, if there are other things we value.
Yeah.
So imagine that the
Yes.
husband and wife, in your example, the husband is like, hey, these water cooler conversations in these moments, even though, sometimes I say something or she says something at an inconvenient time, for the most part, they've been a real strengthening agent, even where we didn't realize we needed one. And the wife, in my example, hypothetically would say, I think we were good before. I mean, it was fine working in the living room, but
Yep.
I didn't notice any value. So there, when you take it to the workplace, if I say,
Yeah.
I think there is a time where I'm going to have to say that there is a value. The decision made, that I make as the leader of this small organization is that I see a value in water cooler conversations as well as in-person collaboration. And I also see a value in the hybrid work and the being able to choose the best of both worlds, so we can have a conversation around it. But what's not debatable to me, and it's not a collaborative decision, I hope everybody buys in, but it's not collaborative, is that we're going to continue post-COVID the way we did during COVID, which is nobody comes in. That's not acceptable to me. So there's a point where it's not just a we all recognize conversation. It's a
This is why I wanted to bring this up, because in my eyes, there's a chain reaction of comparative conversations. I mean, it's not unlike setting a boundary. It is every person. It reminds me a tiny bit of early on, as things were, like January or February. I think I've mentioned this before. I was talking to one client who wanted to have a conversation about how can he insist that his two people come into the office more. And so I was digging around, because in my own mind, I'm like, oh, that's really tricky, because this was early. And I was like, oh, that's, if I was feeling that, if I was the employee, you'd have to give me a substantial, like, I'd need to know why, because it feels risky. And I was like, okay, well, is there something about what they're doing that they can't do at home? He's like, well, not really. But, I was like, well, are sales dropping? Are like clients complaining? I was trying to find like the substantive thing he could say. And then he just like slumps. I can see in the screen. He slumps. He goes, oh, okay. The fact I like it that I like it better when people are here. It's not fun for me if they're not here. And that's a totally valid feeling. And here's the thing, like, so fast forward that to now, him in that case, like, you get to decide, depending on if it's your company or whatever, you can say like, this is the boundary I'm setting. And then there's like a ... and the other people get to decide whether that's okay for them or not. Like I could make up a scenario where you say, this is what I want. And Kim or Lacey or somebody might be, I totally understand that. And I've just discovered that I can't be that person anymore.
Right.
Like,
okay,
and I'm so sorry, because I never imagined a future where I wouldn't be here forever, but I've just realized this is too important to me. And
yeah, at some point you are leading, in many cases, a volunteer workforce. They can leave if they want to.
Right.
But within that,
but imagine if you had like 4 partners and you all have to get on the same page. I mean, like, these are going to be tough.
And so you can still have that. You don't have to agree on exactly how you're doing it. But if I say to them, as I have, that I see a value in us being together and having, for all the reasons that I had listed previously in our conversation. So what is the best way that we can accomplish that?
Mm-hmm.
And then, so if I have that and they're saying, okay, well, I think they agree with me that there's a value, but even if they didn't, they say, okay, well, that's the guardrail. That's the boundary of this conversation. We're going to have some in-person time because you perceive a value. Now, how do we accomplish that? And then we can start into, well, scheduling it, or is it week by week? Is it a hard time at 9:00 on Thursday? We're all going to be here. Or is it just, each week we can pick some time, or whatever it is. We can collaborate on a hybrid model, but I still think that I get to, and I should set some sort of ground rules for it.
You can do in your position, you can do whatever you want. Like the thing that I think is interesting is this to me feels exactly like the way I have seen you approach every law conversation I've had witness to, which is, and it's not unlike, probably why we're friends. It's not unlike how I think about facilitated conversations where people's instinct is to come in and debate solutions because they have spent time on their own thinking about a thing. And they're like, I want to only work afternoons on every other Tuesday. They've come up with a solution and they're committed to it and they want to discuss that.
Yeah.
You always, you never engage in that conversation first. Every time I've come to you with like, I have this thing and I, might want to hire you. You never let me have that conversation first. You always back me up to, what do you actually care about? What are you trying to get out of this? What about this really matters? And I watched one of my clients early on, as she was bringing people back from furlough, do this like expertly. I've actually almost wanted to have her kind of map it out how she did it, because she did this really good job of, she wanted people to come back more. She recognized that some people were loving having the Friday off because as she furloughed, she said, okay, we don't work on Fridays while this is this time. So as we're bringing, people liked having Friday as maybe a work day, maybe a not. So they just backed up and said like, okay, what do we need? Like what really matters? And some of the things that came up were, because we have people in different time zones, there has to be some part of the day where, we can all talk or get, we're all on the same time. So they're like, great. So how about like 10, everybody works 10 to 2 Monday through Thursday. So there's this protected time where everybody's there. Fridays, and you can work 36 hours in the week, doesn't matter where else it is, but you start there. Fridays are like no meeting day. They came up with their own solution, but they came up with the solution by gathering together and legitimizing actual issues versus if you go into it fuzzy, like, well, we have to have time we can collaborate. So we all have to be here 40 hours a week. Well, do you really? Like, you don't collaborate 40 hours a week. So what would check the box of that legitimate problem so that fear can go away or that concern can go away? But it doesn't necessarily have to look like that solution. So investigatory problem hunting, I think, is a one way to get to instead of debating solutions.
I think that one of the things that COVID forced us to recognize is that you can do away in many organizations, certainly mine. If we ever had it, it destroyed the myth that you're not productive if you're not behind your desk in the office.
Yeah.
And if I look at it, as I do a lot, I find that the productive times of people differ. And sometimes they're responding or they're sending things. And I've gotten more texts and emails this past year than I've ever gotten from people, clients and my team alike, saying, I'm just hitting send on this because this is what I'm working on it. I know it's late. I know it's early. I know it's a weekend or whatever it is. Don't feel you have to respond, but I just want to get this up. So I think that the first thing that at least for me, is to recognize the legitimacy of other people using their experience, their body clock, their temperament, their mental, their cognitive life cycle, whatever it happens to be, to choose their own adventure when it comes to work, and then kind of guide and see where that intersection point can be or where you can nudge them towards an intersection point, as opposed to making people build their own way of doing things around your firm structure.
Yeah.
It's a completely different model. And so that's what we're working on. How do you work best? How are you happiest? Let's figure that out. Yeah. And then let's nudge it towards ticking the box on what I think is important in terms of in-person time.
Yeah.
And we'll come up with this model, but it's people-centric and not firm policy-centric.
Yeah. I certainly witnessed this with my daughter and her homework. Like early on when she would have homework, I would it just, I didn't even really think about it. It made sense. Like, don't leave your homework until 8:30 or 9:00 at night. That's it. You don't watch this movie, get your homework done and then watch a movie, because I'm a morning person. And the thought of starting my homework at 8:30 or 9, oh my God, like that's just not, you will not get the best of me. But then I actually step back and watch her, and between like 7 p.m. and 11 p.m., like you might actually wonder if she has a Coke habit. Like she has more like energy and focus and creative energy at that time of night. And it's so much so that I am exhausted by it.
But
that's when she works.
And with kids, it was, I think that's the perfect thing, because early on with David, I told him, because I didn't understand his work habits either. I didn't understand this. And I said, look, I'll let you do it your way.
Yeah.
Then we're going to have a conversation. And you win if you can point to grades or whatever and just go scoreboard. If you can if you can say scoreboard and I can look and you've accomplished what you have to accomplish, then I just shut up, because you're right. You can figure that out. And so both David and Alex, in different schedules, different ways of approaching things, and it's kind of a joke in the house, they've both gone scoreboard. Because I didn't even know, why are they doing it? Like, they'll watch this movie, they'll do this, they'll approach work in ways that are so opposite the way I would approach work.
Yeah.
But if they can look up and go, if there's an agreed set of metrics,
yes,
and you can look up and you can go scoreboard and just point to it, okay.
And I would add one last thing to that, is to not imagine that this is a one-shot deal at these conversations. So like if you talk to if you make some decisions like, oh, okay, we're going to all come in we're always going to be here on Wednesday unless, something happens, and then we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Or like my client that picked the 10 to 2 time. And then 2 weeks out, that's not working for some reason. Then you get to have another conversation. The word design keeps coming up for me. And it's my hope that not just hierarchical leaders or whatever, that like leaders in whatever that's called, what are the versions, like whatever. We all have a capacity to lead the design of this next normal and help surface the things that might easily just be glossed over because we just revert back to the way it always was.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories. You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best
Lovingly
of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us. Which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.